All right, welcome back in, you guys. We got One Piece chapter 1152 here with us today, and it is titled An Awful Day. But needless to say, it's a great day for us One Piece fans, am I right? So, funny enough, reading through this chapter the first time, I was like, yo, this is straightforward, it's simple, this will be a short video. And then I went back over, I read it a second and third time, I took my notes on what I wanted to talk about, and I realized that there's a lot here. So we're gonna hop right into it. My name is Sai, we're here to break down that chapter, theorize a little bit, and just have some fun. So, first up, let's start with what is not fun. The cover page story. Dude, I thought last week that Oda was pulling a twofer. Right, we got Yamato beating a new Yokozuna, and we also had Kawamatsu in the background. We knocked out two birds with one stone. But here we are. Here we are. This week, we're still here. We're still giving Kawamatsu the hat. But alas, it's finally over. Yamato has successfully delivered the hat. She successfully delivered Yasuo's blade to his grave. What's next on the agenda? Personally, I'm assuming Yamato is going to go visit Kinemon and Momonosuke again to tell them that the deed is done. But at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Yamato gets distracted with another side quest. I mean, hell, dude. That is what this cover page story has been week in and week out. Like I said, I am a huge Yamato fan. I was jumping for joy when we saw that Yamato was getting a dedicated story here. And I'm still happy, don't get me wrong, I still think the payoff will be here, but when, brother? When will something crazy happen, man? I don't know. It's funny because, I talk about bad things happening to Wano all the time, like, Blackbeard could come, we could get Buggy, we could get other pirates, marines, and somebody said, Sai, are you telling me that you want Wano to be oppressed again? They just recovered from Kaido. And it's like, yes, brother, yes, I want something exciting to happen here. What are you talking about? But of course, I do take a lot of solace in the fact that Page 1 and Ulti are here. I still think their reintroduction is really cool, and it's kind of fun seeing them just in the background. Like, I do wonder what Kawamatsu thinks about them. Like, oh, Page 1? Ulti? What are you guys doing here, right? Wait, weren't you guys on Kaido's team, like, a month ago? Huh? I wish we could get, like, dialogue in these cover pages, but alas, we got what we got. And again, what do you guys think will happen next week? What do you think Yamato will do? So, on to the actual chapter. First page, we got the notorious, infamous lift of Elbaph being shown, and it is, it's a boat strapped to some chains that go all the way to the Sun Realm. Honestly, I expected the lift to be something crazy, something absurd, something that utilizes special Elbaph technology, but it is a very basic lift. So moving on, it turns out that Garrett and Chopper are planning to stay back here in the underworld to take care of the wounded Scopper and Loki. Of course, that means that the rest of the gang are going to go up to the Sun Realm. But because of the discourse and dialogue in this chapter, a lot actually happens, and it turns out that Garrett, Chopper, Scopper, Loki, Hardin, and Luffy end up staying behind as well. Pretty insane, we go from, hey, Elbaph needs help, to, oh wait, there's a flashback happening. Quick, let's all hang out here for a minute, right? So it's pretty cool seeing that Zoro and Sanji are part of the Vanguard unit. They're the ones who are going to go up first. So, of course, getting back to the chronological order of things, Scopper and Luffy have a little conversation. And because Luffy is about to go up to the Sun Realm, Scopper gives him some words of advice. He says, hey, Luffy, be mindful of how you use your Conqueror's Haki. Those guys, the Holy Knights, they are not actually immortal. Great advice, right? He didn't exactly tell us how to hurt the Holy Knights, but he did point us in the right direction. He essentially is telling us to master our Conqueror's Haki, to use it properly. What does that look like, though? We're not exactly super sure. So there we have it. The way to hurt the Holy Knights, the way to put them down in the dirt permanently, is through the use of Conqueror's Haki. So, If you've watched my videos for a while now, if you've been following me for a good minute, you know that I've been pretty mixed on this solution. On one hand, it's like, okay, the Straw Hats are going to be completely useless, right? Jinbei's not going to get a 1v1, Nami's not going to get a 1v1, Usopp's not, Brook's not, or Robin can't do anything, right? I've always been hung up on that aspect of things, but, you know, tackling this from a different perspective, there are aspects of this solution that I actually do enjoy, because that would mean that we would have to bring back old characters who have Conqueror's Haki into the fray, right? Like Boa Hancock, who most notably hates Celestial Dragons because of her past. Your Doflamingos, who also hate Celestial Dragons because of his past. Your Captain Kids, who kind of hates everybody. Your Donchin Jiaos, who are allied with the Straw Hats. I do like the Conqueror's Haki aspect because of that. I would love to see just, you know, the Suicide Squad of One Piece come together, band together versus the world government. But, of course, I just hope that the other Straw Hats who do not have Conqueror's Haki are not forgotten about. And I have heard a really cool theory out on the side that maybe Luffy will master Conqueror's Haki infusion. Kind of like Joy Boy, right? Joy Boy put Conqueror's Haki in rope, he gave it to Emmet, and Emmet used it against the Gorosei. I have heard a lot of people saying that maybe Luffy will master his Conqueror's Haki just like Joy Boy, and he will end up giving each and every one of the Straw Hats who do not have Conqueror's Haki some rope or maybe some weapons that have his Conqueror's Haki within it so that they can fight the Holy Knights. And honestly, I love that. I love both the Suicide Squad idea and I love the Conqueror's Haki infusion idea. I think they're both phenomenal, and because of those ideas, I do like this answer, right? You know, like I said, I was skeptical at first, but the more I sat on my laurels about it, the more I ended up enjoying it. So yeah, I do want to ask you guys, how do you feel about the Conqueror's Haki route? Do you like it? Do you not like it? I would love to hear those thoughts down below. So as far as what it means to use your Conqueror's Haki correctly, like I said, I'm still up in the air about that one. Maybe you have to actively know what you're hitting. Maybe it's kind of like Ryuo, where you're infusing your Conqueror's Haki into your opponent's body so that you hurt them from within. Or maybe it's something more abstract, like, oh, you know, you have to use your Conqueror's Haki to overpower their own willpower. Or maybe you use it to hurt their soul. I think there's a lot of cool ways that Oda can work with this. But yeah, Conqueror's Haki is the answer. And because of that, Loki ends up chiming in. And I'm going to read what he says verbatim because I think it's actually pretty cool. He says, Gaban, that just made it click for me. I wasn't able to put it into words before. ... My own power ... I'm the only one left who's faced these knights before. I know I can beat them. Brother, did we just get a soft confirmation that Loki has Conqueror's Haki? I think so. And I don't hear anybody complaining about it either. You know, he says this and then everybody online is like, oh yeah, yeah, that makes sense, right? I mean, just look at the guy, right? 2.6 billion beret bounty. He is the biggest giant in Elbaph. He can apparently beat all the giants in Elbaph. Yeah, this dude has Conqueror's Haki. By the way, his role model is Roxy Zebek. It lines up. It really does line up. So I do kind of scratch my chin at that dialogue though, because when he says that he's faced these Holy Knights before, does he mean back in the past, or does he mean when Shamrock and Gunko showed up? Because I wouldn't exactly call that a face-off, right? They were kind of just bullying Loki, who's chained up. So I do wonder if back when Harald died, or maybe while Loki was out on the open seas, he ran into Holy Knights before and he fought them before. I think that could be a pretty cool solution. And of course, it could play into the flashback we get in this chapter, but that, of course, is left up to interpretation. And I do want to ask you guys again, I'm going to say that a lot, right? I do love hearing your guys' opinions on these things, but has Loki fought the Holy Knights in the past? Is that what he's referring to? Or does he simply mean the Shamrock and Gunko beatdown? So, going on, Loki says, free me and take me with you, Harden. Harden says no, and then that is when Scopper says, there's another in your group who uses Conqueror's Haki too, which is an interesting translation. I'm reading TCB's translation right now, but in other translation sites and, you know, due to other translators hopping into this chapter, apparently Scopper says there's more than one of you that has Conqueror's Haki. They both mean the same thing, but there is more nuance to the latter translation. So he does look over at Sanji and Zoro when he says this. Sanji runs up saying, hey, is it me? Am I the one with Conqueror's Haki? I knew it, you know. Zoro and Jinbei's stocks were too high up there. It's time for me to shine again. Scopper ignores Sanji, and he goes straight to Zoro. He glares at him, and he says, you there, swordsman. Your body seems to be growing accustomed to it. Zoro's like, wait, what? I have Conqueror's Haki? Pretty funny, right? You know, he's been using Conqueror's Haki. I wouldn't say this entire time, but he's used it in Wano multiple times, and he's just never noticed. And I have seen a lot of people slandering Zoro for this, saying, oh, like, what a bum, you know, how could he not know he has Conqueror's Haki? But that's understandable. I mean, go back to Impel Down and Marineford. Luffy used Conqueror's Haki against the wolves. He had no idea what he did. The wolves just passed out. And then there's Marineford. Luffy used Conqueror's Haki to knock out the guards who were about to kill Ace, and Luffy had no idea what he did, right? He needed a mentor to tell him what the hell was that ability. So Zoro not knowing that he had Conqueror's Haki this entire time, I don't think it's that absurd, especially since he apparently just started oozing it last arc. Of course, they do leave that up in the air. We don't know when Zoro started leaking Conqueror's Haki. It could have been in Wano, because that's the first sighting of Conqueror's Haki from Zoro, or it could have been way, way, way in the past, right? If you told me that Zoro has been oozing and leaking Conqueror's Haki ever since Punk Hazard against Monet, I'd believe you. I've even heard people saying that Zoro has been leaking Conqueror's Haki ever since Ini's lobby against Kaku because of his Ashura ability. And you know what? I'm cool with that too. We've always had things like that in the past where we see an ability once or twice, we don't really know how it works, and then later we learn, boom, it's just straight up Haki. Kind of like Mantra in Skypiea, right? Oh, you know, the priestesses all have Mantra. Anel is using Mantra. And then we come to find out that it's just observation Haki. So, like I said, I'm cool with whenever Zoro had Conqueror's Haki first. You know, I'm pretty open with that one. So after Zoro learns about this, Gabon really lays it on him. And I kind of like this, right? Because Gabon, he was a wing of the Pirate King. He was Roger's left hand. He knows the weight of that title. He knows what you need to do and have to be able to do to make it to Laugh Tale. So he says, yo, how absurd. Haki is a power that must be understood and tamed. Your captain is one of the 4 emperors. You should be meticulous if you intend to have his back. And what's crazy is that is such a sound argument, that is such a sound reasoning, that even Zoro apologizes, right? Zoro like starts sweating a little bit. He's like, whoa, my bad, guy, my bad, you know? And I love that, right? Because Zoro knows what he should be. It kind of reminds me of when he lost to Mihawk. And Zoro was like, hey, like, I promise I'll get stronger. I'll never lose again, right? Zoro takes his oath to Luffy very seriously. He takes his position very seriously. So when Gabon hits him with these facts, like, hey, you need to level up, man. Like, you can't just slouch. I like that Zoro's like, oh, he's kind of right. So Sanji, of course, jumps into this conversation and he says, hey, old man, what about me? And then that is when Oda, that guy, dude, that monster, dude, Oda in the office laughing at the fan base right now. After Sanji says that, Oda cuts away. He cuts away. He goes to Loki and Harald, and, you know, they're yelling at each other. Sanji's left up in the air. I've seen a lot of different interpretations for this. I've seen a lot of different takes, and they're all solid. I'm going to discuss a couple, or at least the ones that I align with, but I do think that Scopper said something to Sanji. Because when we see Sanji's reaction, you know, he's like, and then the cigarette's like falling off. It's like, wait a minute. Did Scopper tell Sanji that he did have Conqueror's Haki? Or did he tell him that he didn't? Like, people are saying that Scopper is confirming it, and that's why we don't see it, right? And then Sanji is shocked. But there also exists a world where Scopper's like, hey, I don't sense anything, right? Maybe it's because Sanji has Germa DNA, because he's genetically modified, he can't have Conqueror's Haki, which would be weird. I think that would be really strange. But I don't know. Personally, I have always fallen on the side that Sanji will get Conqueror's Haki. Not just because, you know, I do One Piece YouTube. People think I have like a weird agenda because I'm a One Piece YouTuber. Brother, ever since we first learned about Conqueror's Haki, I said Zoro needs it, Sanji needs it. Hell, I was actually on board with the Usopp theories for Conqueror's Haki, you know? Maybe he won't know what's happening, but I think he'll have like a small percentage of it. I think as proper wings of the Pirate King, as people who always show up and fight the hardest opponents, I do think that if Zoro has it, Sanji needs it as well. You know, you cannot have one wing outshine the other too greatly. I always think Zoro is going to be number one, but Sanji is right there behind him. You know, I mean, it kind of goes back to what Sanji said in this chapter, right? Jinbei stocks and Zoro stocks are up. They're at an all-time high. Well, okay, maybe not Jinbei stocks because, you know, he's like the crew firefighter, but Zoro's up there, you know? So I do think Sanji needs to catch up to some extent, and I always loved Sanji's epithet. Black-leg Sanji. Black-leg Sanji. They called him that initially because he wore black pants. Nowadays, he doesn't really wear black pants anymore, right? Every arc he gets a brand new color. Brother, bring back the black leg. How do you do that, you might ask? Well, give him some damn Conqueror's Haki. You know, we saw Ifrit Janbei, that made his leg blue. Make it black. Give him some black flames, you know, put some Conqueror's Haki on it, man. I don't know if Sanji's gonna unlock it this arc, but I think one way or another, in the future, he will get it. That is my bias. You know, that is where I've always been. And here's the thing, too. It's pretty much confirmed in this chapter that Scopper has Conqueror's Haki. That was a big debate 2 to 3 chapters ago, but it's confirmed here, right? Scopper used Conqueror's Haki to hurt the Holy Knights. Scopper is Sanji's parallel, right? Scopper is the left hand of Roger. Sanji is the left hand of Luffy. They're both wings of the Pirate King. And then not just that, but Luffy even looks at Scopper and sees Sanji. That was one of his first reactions. Scopper has it. I think Sanji's gonna get it. And I genuinely want to throw a poll up there. Like, hey, how do people feel about this? Because I'm so curious. Like, where does the community fall on Sanji getting that conch, right? That COC. With that being said, though, it is time to move on to the next topic. We got Loki and Harden. Of course, Loki is trying to say, hey, Harden, you're pathetic. You'd rather sit back and let these outsiders save our homeland. And that is when Harden bites back and he says, who's to say you won't side with the WG? You could easily stab Elbaph in the back again. It's brutal, brother. It is brutal. Loki puts on this tough guy persona every single chapter, especially with Harden. But Harden, man, he is selecting the right dialogue choices in this chapter, right? Everything Harden says, you can see Loki's reaction. He's like, whoa. You know, like, Loki is taking mental damage from Harden's words. Harden goes on, and he says, just like you did on that day, how can you expect me to trust you? And then we get Stanson, and Stanson says, Harden, hurry up, man. We cannot let the casualties pile up anymore. We gotta go up to the Sun Realm. And then here comes Luffy, trying to quell the flames and speed this up. He says, Loki, I'll make this simple. Join my crew. Pulling out the classic gag. Pulling out the classic one-liner. I love it when Luffy does this. You know, Luffy has done this to pretty much all the Straw Hats, right? He's also done this to the tree and the zombie horse on Thriller Bark. He also did this to Brownbeard, which, hey, Brownbeard should have joined. You know, I will die on that hill, man. I love Brownbeard. Brownbeard should have joined the crew. He did this with, of course, Yamato, Momonosuke, Kinemon. There's so many characters, even Vivi, right? Luffy loves dropping this line to people that he believes are good. Okay, now that I say that, it's kind of weird that he said that to the tree and the horse, but, you know, he wanted them to join because they're kind of funny looking. But either way, Luffy trusts Loki so much that he's willing to extend that invitation. This shocks Harden, but Harden understands Luffy, right? Harden understands that Luffy is a great judge of character, and he says, hey, so you're going with your gut, huh? And then Luffy just says, yep, I can't wait to see how this guy fights. But sadly, though, Zoro and Sanji are not on board with this idea, and neither is Loki, right? Loki says, do not mess with me, you runt. There's no way I'm becoming your underling. Zoro's reasoning is that Loki would not fit on the ship. And Sanji says, yo, the food supply, man. Loki eats more than you, Luffy. And I think those are all very valid criticisms of Loki joining the crew. Personally, the thought of Loki joining the Straw Hats, I think is very enticing. I love Loki. I think he's a really cool character. And hey, if Luffy's gonna be Pirate King, why not bring on a powerhouse like Loki, right? Luffy said it best, Elbaph doesn't want him, so why not join Luffy's crew? So yeah, in that regards, I do think Loki is a great fit, but you know, Loki's mentor, his idol, man, it's Rox D. Zebek. Rox, his ambition was to be king of the world. So would Loki actually join Luffy if he wants to follow Rox's footsteps? I don't think so. You know, I think he will take that conqueror's route and forge his own path, but you never know. You know, the door is now open for Loki to join. Personally, if he were to join the Straw Hats, I think it would be through Harden. Because Harden has the new giant warrior pirates. They already have a giant ship. They already have giant food supplies. So I think Loki joining them makes more sense. And then Loki could be under the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, which I think is a perfect middle ground. I have seen some theories, though, saying that maybe the owl is the solution to Loki joining the crew. Maybe the owl, who has this mysterious nurture no me, might be able to either shrink Loki, or the owl could make the Thousand Sunny bigger. I think those are both dandy ideas, but I think they each have their own problems. Let's say we shrink Loki. By doing that, we're taking away all of his inherent abilities, right? Loki gets a lot of power. I mean, not just from his training and his devil fruit, but he is an ancient giant, right? We're essentially stripping that away from him. And then what if he wants to become bigger again? What are we gonna do? Are we gonna have the owl following the Straw Hat ship to make him bigger, to make him his normal size, and then shrink him again when he gets back on the ship? I think that'd be a little bit odd. As far as making the ship bigger, yes, that would work for Loki, but just imagine what that would be like for the regular Straw Hats. Oh, quick, Jinbei, get the helm! Okay, Luffy! And then he starts running for like 10 chapters because it's so far away now. Oh, I gotta use the bathroom. Where is it? It's like 10 miles that way. Like, making the ship bigger is a solution for Loki, but that would be a big pain in the ass for the regular Straw Hats. So no, I do not think making the ship bigger is a viable option, because that would heavily inconvenience so many Straw Hats. So that is why I do like the middle ground, where he simply joins Harden, and he helps Harden become king of the giants. Or maybe Loki has his own ambitions and they go off and do their own thing. But either way, I do think this is really interesting, but I'm not sold on the Loki for Nakama train yet. I think it's a really cool idea, and I would love it if it happened, but there's a lot of logistics we're gonna have to work through here on this island if that does end up becoming the case. So we go on a little bit, and we have Stanson and Goldenberg again yelling at Harden to make his pretty ass over there to the lift. It's kind of funny. When I saw this panel creep up, I had a little bit of a deja vu thing going on. I was like, wait a minute. I read this before. And that is when I ended up scrolling back up, only to realize that we have 3 separate panels of Harden's crew telling him to hurry his ass up. So that's pretty funny. You know, just the gang saying, hey guys, come on, you know, our people are dying up there. They need our help. Harden, please. And that, of course, is when Luffy tells Zoro and Sanji to go on without them. And Harden also ends up staying, like I said earlier. And, you know, going back to the Sanji conquers Haki talk, I do not think Luffy, well, he would, actually, I lie, but I think it'd be really odd if we sent Sanji and Zoro up there and Sanji had no means of fighting the Holy Knights. I have seen people saying that, oh, you know, Sanji's just gonna help the women. You know, he's gonna help Robin and help Nami. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. But is that really what we want for Sanji? Like, do we just want Sanji on rescue duty? Right? Like, we have the Holy Knights here, you know, the WG's biggest fighting force, their strongest fighting force. And you're telling me Sanji's not gonna try to do something? So yeah, I do think Sanji will try to fight the Holy Knights. Maybe he'll lose, right? Maybe Sanji will realize that, yeah, I need to really lock in and somehow learn Conqueror's Haki. I think that'd be cool. Hell, maybe because women are in danger, that is why Sanji unlocks Conqueror's Haki. Think about the matchups right now. Right now, Nami and Robin are tied up due to Gonko and St. Somers' ability. Sanji goes up there, he's going to be enraged. And don't forget, Ripley. Ripley is on her way to save Colin, who right now is shepherding the kids. St. Somers. If St. Somers starts fighting Ripley and beats her, can you guys even imagine how upset Sanji would be? Maybe that is what he needs. Maybe that is the Conqueror's Haki bloom that Sanji has been waiting for. He needs a woman to awaken it. And what better woman on this island, you know, other than Nami and Robin, of course, than Scopper's wife, you know, his parallel's wife. I think that would be fantastic. But of course, I'm a little bit biased, right? I love Zoro, I love Sanji, I want them to be almost neck and neck. So, going on with the chapter, Scopper looks at Harden and he says, Harden, release him. Let Loki go. And of course, Harden says, wait, what was that, Yasan? What are you talking about? 14 years ago, Loki murdered 113 members of the castle guard. He left Elder Jarl at the brink of death, and he killed our father with his own two hands. He is the worst criminal in our country's history. Scopper says, I know that. But on that day, I felt a strange emanation of Haki coming from Oust Castle. Shanks and I went there to investigate, and looking back, it's possible we didn't have the whole story. And with that, we have now triggered the Scopper King Harald Shanks flashback. Scopper looks at Harden, and he says, Harden, who else can get him talking? You may have had different mothers, but you're still brothers. And that's when Harden says, okay, 3 minutes. Loki, you have 3 minutes to explain to me what happened in that castle long ago. If you truly consider yourself a warrior of Elbaph, swear on our gods that what you say is the truth. And like I said, Harden is hitting all the best verbal ticks. And Loki says, that's cruel, brother. Do you really want me to relive that day? I don't want to remember. It was truly awful. And here we go, man. 14 years in the past, the day of King Harald's murder. We kick it off with Jarl and Loki walking up to the castle. The reason I put so much emphasis on Jarl is because he should also know the truth. You know, keep that in mind. You know, I'll bring that up later, but Jarl should know, man, what the hell's going on here? But we get a young Loki and a young Jarl. They're walking up. And what's cool about this is that you can actually see that Loki has a different hammer. In that shot, Loki doesn't actually have Ragnir. So I'm kind of wondering, where did Loki get Ragnir from? You know, was Ragnir hidden in Oust Castle and he just didn't have it yet? Or did Loki acquire Ragnir while he was out and about as a pirate? So getting back to it, it looks like King Harald has specifically summoned Loki and Jarl to the throne room. And Loki says, I wonder what my old man wants. You know, it's hard to care about his whims because he is a government dog. He sold out to the people who killed Rox D. Zebek. If that's the direction Elbaph is heading towards, then I will oppose it. And that's odd. I think this dialogue strikes me as very odd. Because we hear about what King Harald has been doing, right? He built schools. He's trying to open Elbaph. Is that what King Harald said the world government wants Elbaph to do? Because if that's the case, then he's lying, right? Emu and the WG, they wanted Elbaph to be barbarians. They wanted Elbaph to pick up swords and weapons and wage war. So what's going on here? What's with this very mixed perception? And then, you know, going back to earlier in this chapter, when Harden is talking to Loki, Harden says that back then, 14 years ago, Loki picked the world government side. Did he? Because based on the dialogue at the beginning of this flashback, it seems like that is what Loki doesn't want to do. It seems like King Harald is actually perpetuating the WG's ideas. So what's going on here? Is Harald lying to Emu and the world government? Is King Harald lying to Elbaph? Is it both, perhaps? Because that is what it seems like. Like he's telling Emu that he's raising Elbaph to be a bunch of warriors, and then he's telling Elbaph that he's following the world government's orders by making the next generation of kids pacifists? What's going on here, King Harald? So, Jarl and Loki make it to the throne room, and that is when one of the guards says, hey, like, let me consult with the king first before I let you in. Loki says, wait, the king summoned us. This is my home. You're gonna let us in. So Loki takes his foot and he smashes that guard into the door. Loki screams out, old man, I am back. But before he can let out that word fully, he sees something heinous. He sees all the soldiers in the throne room stabbing his dad. And his dad is silhouetted. King Harald is silhouetted. What is going on? You know, if you look closely at King Harald, it actually looks like he's been transformed into a demon, right? Because we learned that King Harald ripped his horns out a long time ago, right? We saw his portrait. But when you look at that panel of King Harald being stabbed, you actually see a horn coming out of King Harald's face, his mouth even. Kind of like how when Dory and Brogy get their demonic transformations, they also grow horns - tusks out of their mouths. And then you look at King Harald's backside and you get this sharp point coming out of it. And that does, of course, remind me of the demonic bat wings that Dory and Brogy are also sporting. So it does indeed look like King Harald was given a demonic transformation by Emu. So now, what the heck is going on here? Why did the soldiers end up stabbing King Harald? Is it because they realized that he's actually a demon? Is it because they're all possessed? You know, maybe Emu coerced all of them to stab the king. Maybe it is a pure mutiny. Maybe all the soldiers do not like following the world government, right? Maybe they also agree with Loki that Elbaph should not be peaceful. Maybe they shouldn't have schools here, and that is why they ended up killing the king. We have no idea. You know, for all we know, maybe Emu made King Harald go demon mode. Maybe they made King Harald enrage and start attacking people, and the soldiers had no choice but to put him down. There's a lot of possibilities here. And the craziest part, the craziest thing to think about is that there's also a third party in this castle. So I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit because next up we get the Scopper and Shanks scene. But going to the end of the 14-year flashback, we actually see Haki being released from the castle, right? The strange Haki that Scopper sensed. You know, and it's funny because Scopper, when he calls it strange Haki, that's also what he called the Haki he sensed from the castle present day when Shamrock and Gunko arrived. So I do think that a Holy Knight is here in the past at the castle too. And then we get some dialogue coming from the castle where we see a guard saying, wait, who closed the doors? Let us out. Help. We see that he gets stabbed. And then we also see that Elder Jarl gets stabbed. And then we see another mysterious figure walk into Elbaph's treasury. And they take the forbidden devil fruit that has been passed down within Elbaph. So, according to what we learned at the beginning of this arc, we heard that Loki was the one who ate the legendary devil fruit. That silhouette at the end does not look like Loki. No hammer, no horns, smaller stature even, right? Like, I do not think that Loki actually ate a legendary devil fruit. If he did, it's going to be something else, right? Maybe they supplemented a fake devil fruit. Maybe it's just a devil fruit they found on the side. But I do not think any longer that Loki ate this fruit. I think somebody else took it entirely. And I'm gonna be honest. You know, if I had to put my money down somewhere, I would say that that devil fruit is actually the Gomu Gomu no Mi. The Sun God Nika fruit, sorry. I still caught the Gomu Gomu no Mi, because other than that, it would be like, what? The human fruit, model Nika, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue as well. But yeah, I think the timeline matches up really well with the Gomu Gomu no Mi, because think about it, right? This is 14 years ago. What do we know happens 1 year later? Well, Shanks attacks a Cypher Pole ship that was going to Marie's Raw, and they were carrying the Sun God Nika fruit. He found Who's Who's world government ship, he attacked it, he took the devil fruit, and then that is when Luffy ate it. That is what I believe in right now, but even I'm not sure, right? Like, it's still up in the air, because maybe this is Loki. You know, maybe Loki finds this guy, and that is what he set out to see, right? Maybe Loki was looking for this legendary devil fruit too. He found it, he ate it, done. I think that could also be very plausible, but we do not know yet. So, going on, going over to the Scopper and Shanks portion, there's really only one thing to talk about, and that's the fact that Shanks has the world government mark on him. So, obviously I read spoilers. People were calling this the Mark of the Abyss. I'm hesitant to call it the mark. I think it is the mark, but I don't think it is the mark that the Holy Knights have currently. And the reason why is because it's not complete. It doesn't look like it's fully finished yet. It looks like Shanks is a recruit, but he's not a full-fledged member of the Holy Knights. Because if you go over and you look at what Killingham and Sommers have, because they both have the bandage with that mark on it, it's identical, but Sommers and Killingham also have an additional arc on their marks. Shanks does not have that yet. So maybe Shanks isn't there yet. Maybe he's not high enough up in the world government food chain to get that arc. Not sure. Right? We have no idea how the Abyss mark works yet. Maybe Shanks has the powers because he has part of the mark. Maybe he has no powers because the mark isn't completed. A lot of things are left up in the air. Right? We could say that Shanks has a transformation, he has Emu's powers, he has the Abyss Circle, Shanks can regenerate. But that also doesn't have to be the case because the mark isn't done. I am very torn on that. I'm very in the middle. I am a fence sitter. I think there's nothing wrong with being a fence sitter when we are genuinely missing a lot of information, right? Where we're taking these guesses, and I like these guesses. I love the theories, man. I'm all about it, but I'm not fully on one side or the other yet, right? Because let's say Shanks has the Holy Knight abilities. Well, why didn't he regenerate his arm when the Sea King ate it, right? Did Shanks choose not to regenerate it? Maybe Holy Knight abilities don't work in the water. Maybe Sea Kings are the special exception because they're kind of tied to Shirahoshi and the Mermaid Princess. I don't know. I think there's a lot left up in the air with that. And then with the mark, like, what do you need to do to get that arc? What do you need to do to get promoted? And what does the mark even mean? We're calling it the Mark of the Abyss, but for all we know, that could just be a cool tattoo that the Holy Knights have. So yeah, it's pretty tough to deduce anything, but one way or another, what cannot be disputed is the fact that Shanks did end up sacrificing that arm to save Luffy. That is the bet that Shanks made on the future. And I love it. I saw a tweet, right? I'm on Twitter, I'm on TikTok and all that stuff. I saw somebody say this, and it was the corniest thing I've ever heard of. But I loved it. They said that since the Sea King ate Shanks' arm, and since Shanks did that for Luffy, who ate the Sun God Nika fruit at the time, that technically Shanks is the first person that Luffy has ever liberated. And like I said, super corny, super cheesy, but I love that. No, I really do. I read that, I was like, whoa, like that, they kind of cooked with that one, man. But yeah, I thought this was awesome. I love this reveal. And, people are saying Shanks is a rat. I mean, I think we also need more information because, yes, he is working with the WG. Yes, Shanks has been going to Marie's Raw, but it doesn't look like he's working with the WG. Because even in this chapter, right, Scopper and Shanks talk a little bit about King Harald. Scopper says, oh, do you know Harald? He's the king of Elbaph. The people think of him like a god. And Shanks says, yes, I met him at Marie's Raw. We got along all right. But we couldn't speak freely in the Holy Land. Now that we're both in this country, I really want to talk to him before it's too late. We gotta think about why Shanks cannot speak freely up at Marie's Raw. Well, it's because whatever Shanks wanted to say wouldn't fly by the Celestial Dragons. So I do not believe that Shanks is on Emu's side. I think he's simply playing them. I think he's getting close so that he can eventually stab them in the back. I mean, hell, it looks like the world government are plotting something against Harald, and Shanks wants to rant and tell Harald what is about to happen. So yeah, I do not think that Shanks is a bad guy based off of this. I think he's simply doing his duties. You know, he's fulfilling his responsibilities as the Child of Destiny, which is a crazy ass title to give to somebody who is not Luffy. But of course, you know, Shanks is Oda's golden boy. Oda absolutely loves Shanks, so I can see that happening, right? Shanks is the Child of Destiny. And I think this also goes back to what Roger and Shanks talked about shortly after Roger hit Laugh Tale. Because Roger, he came back, and that is when we saw that Shanks and Roger had a conversation, and Shanks ended up crying. You know, Shanks was crying profusely. So maybe that is when Roger told him about his destiny. Like, hey, Shanks, you know, you can't do this or that because you are special, right? Your lineage is this, you can't hang out with Buggy. Which is really sad when you think about it. I mean, Shanks even says it himself. He says, hey, my life has completely changed. I honestly just wanted to be a carefree pirate with Buggy. Oh, man. I really hope that one day Oda does a one-off where he has Shanks and Buggy as dual pirate captains if they did start a crew together. I think that'd be so awesome. You know, Oda's done that in the past before, by the way, where Oda did a spin-off version of Marineford where Sabo shows up and he saves Ace and Luffy. And I was like, yo, that is fire. You know, if we did that, why not do another one where Shanks and Buggy are really good friends? And I wonder how that would have gone down. If Shanks and Buggy really did become dual captains, would Shanks be a bad guy with Buggy? Because Buggy was going around, you know, holding hostages, you know, killing people, taking over towns. Or would Shanks change Buggy and Buggy would be a really good guy? Like maybe Buggy becomes strong, you know? Like who's to say that Shanks isn't like, hey Buggy, you know, train up a little bit, brother, you know, just here's some Conqueror's Haki, you know, here's some observation training. I think that'd be so sick. You know, seeing like a different version of Shanks and Buggy, if that were to happen, I think it would be so awesome, man. One Piece, they gotta do what ifs. You know, if you want to milk One Piece hard, what if chapters? What if Buggy and Shanks were the human versions of the blue and red ogre? That'd be sick. I'd pay money for that movie, man. So, since we're on the topic of Shanks, I think this does properly explain why Shanks went after Loki, you know, 6 years ago, right? Because we learned that's when Shanks beat Loki and brought him back here to Elbaph. It is because Loki potentially murdered one of Shanks' friends. All right, Shanks does not take that lightly. If you mess with one of Shanks' friends, you're gonna get put in the dirt. So that perfectly explains why he went after Loki. But now I'm kind of curious because it seems like Scopper even knew that maybe back then they got the facts wrong. So what happened there? Did Loki not tell Shanks that he did not kill his dad? Did Loki not want to relive this day, so he simply fought Shanks and lost? I think there's still a lot of questions with that. And then, of course, like with the whole missing devil fruit of Elbaph, if Shanks actually did go after that and that ended up being the Gomu Gomu no Mi, why didn't that, you know, set off some red alarms for Shanks, right? Like, oh, the world government has the fruit, but Loki is nowhere in sight. Like how does that correlate? I think we're missing Shanks' POV from all of this. And now, as far as the last thing I want to bring up in regards to this flashback, it is Elder Jarl. What is he doing? You know, like Jarl knows that Loki did not kill his dad. So why has Harald not freed Loki? Why did Harald not speak on his behalf? I mean, he is a key witness, and yet Harald has let Loki rot down in the underworld for all these years. Why is that? You know, I think the simplest answer would be that it's because of the sword in Harald's head. Like, maybe because of the sword piercing his brain, Harald cannot remember what happened. I think that is the most plausible route, right? Harald isn't exactly a bad guy. He just doesn't remember, and all he's heard about was that Loki went on a rampage, and he said, oh, I guess so. You know, I think that is what happened there. I don't think there's any ill will yet, but we'll see. We'll see. You know, I think this is all due to the work of a holy knight. You know, whoever stole that devil fruit from Elbaph, it is their doing. Also, one quick hole I gotta mention in regards to Who's Who and Shanks going after this devil fruit and it being the Gumu Gumu no Mi, is that we would have to explain why Who's Who had this devil fruit on his ship. Right? If this is a holy knight that is in the castle, why did they not simply take the devil fruit with them through the Abyss Circle? You know, why did they send Who's Who to pick it up, right? I feel like that's really odd. Like, if I had the Sun God Nika fruit in my possession or a legendary devil fruit in my possession, the Who's Who would be the last person I would call, right? I get it. He's Cypher Pole, you know, he's got a good record at that point, but still, right? If you want a job done right, just do it yourself, brother. You know, that's crazy. But I guess that also explains why Who's Who got such a dastardly punishment. You know, he lost to Shanks. And then they said, hey, Who's Who? You're going to prison, right? You are now a slave, buddy. I think it is because he fumbled massively. You know, I think it is because he lost such a legendary power. And that was this. You know, it's all because it was a big plot to get the Sun God Nika fruit from Elbaph, and Who's Who fumbled the bag. But of course, that is all just speculation for now, right? We don't know what is actually in that chest. So, that is when Oda, that monster, takes us even further back into the past. The narrator box says, a long, long time ago, 109 years before the present day, if you asked anyone what the scariest thing on the seas is, the answer would always be the same. The giant warrior pirates. That was how things were in that era. And in that panel, dude, I'm not gonna lie, man. A young Dorian Brody, they look kind of cool. You know, they're raising their arms up. They got their weapons in the air. You got the fires in the background. You know they just killed a bunch of people, man. It's cool. It's cool. The narrator says, in that age, even ships from the land of giants evoked immense fear due to Elbaph's reputation. He was one of the reasons for said reputation. And we see him. We see King Harald pull a Loki. Right, in this chapter, we had Loki stomping on a guard. Here we have King Harald doing that exact same thing. And also, King Harald's horns are just like Loki's. And yes, we see King Harald stepping on this guy looking for a human princess who's apparently really pretty. And he lets out a barahaha. Tell me who your god is. And the narrator says that Harald began his reign at 45 years of age. Just 15 in human years. Despite this, King Harald, remarkably enough, was pure trash. Dude, he's kind of like Loki, right? Just a guy going around, he's causing a bunch of destruction. Yeah, I wonder how we go from this Harald to the Harald we heard about in recent history, right? A friend of Shanks. You know, this benevolent king, the guy who wants to open schools and he's maybe betraying the world government. Brother, this guy? How? Who humbles this man? Is it because he runs into Harald or Loki's mom? You know, is that the reason why? Is King Harald like Loki, where he's absolutely smitten over a single girl? Because I think that's what it is, right? Women can change you, man. They really can. Or maybe somebody humbles King Harald. That could also be the case. You know, maybe we'll see King Harald's first run-in with the WG. I think that'd be really sick. And I just gotta say this, but I love that we go this far back in time. Because as things stand, 109 years ago, we're not really gonna see a lot of characters we know of, right? A lot of human characters are gonna straight up be dead. You know, like, what is gonna happen here? You know, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of the Gorosei or maybe some Holy Knights because they're seemingly immortal. But outside of that, right, we're not going to see, you know, Roger, you know, we're not going to see Kaido, you know, no Gecko Moria as much as people want him to show back up. Like, no, this is a brand new cast of characters we might meet. And I'm all about it. I guess the only human character we could potentially see would be Dr. Kureha. Which sounds weird, but I mean, Dr. Kureha is the oldest human we know of that's alive. So maybe King Harald runs into her and that's like the one tie into present day. But yeah, brother, I'm excited. You know, the King Harald flashback, this is something we've kind of wanted ever since we first heard his name. And here we have it. You know, this guy's going to go from scumbag to benevolent king. And I'm all about it, brother. I'm all about it. But one thing I do have to mention, though, is that they make a very noteworthy remark here at the end of the chapter. And I apologize, you know, I'm kind of running through this chapter at light speed, and I forgot to mention it. Oh my god, I forgot to mention it. But thankfully I remembered. But time dilation. Yes, during the Shanks in Scopper portion, they drop a really interesting line. Scopper says, "It's been a while since we've shared a bath, Shanks. How long's it been? 3, maybe 4 years." Think about that. Scopper's first guess was 3 years. His second guess was 4. Turns out he's completely off the mark because Shanks says, "Get real. It's been 10 years since the captain died." What's happening? Is Scopper really bad at keeping track of time? Or does time perception here in Elbaph work differently? You guys already know what I'm going to say. I think it works differently. So, based on that dialogue right there, it seems like if there is time dilation going on, the rate would be at 3 times, right? 3 years, 4 years, somewhere in between there, boom, equals out to 10. Times it by 3, done. And then at the very end of the chapter, the reason it just reminded me of that conversation is because the narrator box made sure to point out the difference in human years and giant years. We already knew about that beforehand, right? Giants live on average 3 times longer, but the narrator says it right here. King Harald is 45 years old, which in human terms is 15. The narrator is bringing that back up too, reinforcing the 3 times idea. And this isn't the only instance of time dilation we might have heard about as well. You know, I always reference it, but when Shanks was in Elbaph right before he fought Kid, Shanks says, "Ooh, I must have lost track of time." I believe that when you're on Elbaph, you don't really know how long you've been here. The days fly by at a slower rate. 1 day in Elbaph is 3 days outside. That right there would perfectly explain why Emu has their panties in a bunch. That is the reason why they came here, right? Emu showed up and they said, "Hey, you guys are dawdling here. What is taking you so long? The Holy Land is on fire." And that was really odd because the Holy Knights were just summoned to Elbaph, right? This is the same day. It's maybe been a couple of hours, sure, but it's still only a couple of hours. So how could Marijra have changed that drastically? Why would Emu be so upset that they're taking too long? Well, if you take that time and times it by 3, that would explain so much. And I think this is really interesting because, of course, it ties back to Louis Arnaud's warning, do not linger in Elbaph for too long, and that could just be because time works differently here. And I think this is going to be what Oda is playing at, because think about the world of One Piece for a minute. Sword, the Marines, the Holy Land, Shanks, Buggy, Neomads, the Revolutionaries, Blackbeard. There are so many plot points that need to be touched on. So many plot points that need to be fondled, tickled a little bit. And Oda has not taken us away from Elbaph. Let that soak in. Let it simmer. When we were in Egghead, Oda took the time to go elsewhere.
On Egghead Island.
At the start of the arc, we got the Captain Kobe stuff. We got Cross-Skilled. We got Kid and Law and, Blackbeard and Shanks. We got Barto. We got so many character perspectives when we were on Egghead Island. But look at us today. Oda has not cut away once from Elbaph. Why? With how many things that need to progress, why hasn't Oda done anything yet? I think it's because he can't. Or, well, he can do it, but he'd have to, throw the flashback thing in there or something to allude to the fact that it's taking place at a different time. And it's because, dude, right now, everything is moving at 3 times speed. The minute we leave Elbaph, I think we're going to get hit by a truck. So much brand new information is going to come out. I think it's going to be absurd. Of course, I've seen people saying that, Vivi might come to Elbaph, and I think that'd be interesting, right? Imagine Vivi and Big News Morgans shows up, and they're like, hey, guys, what are y'all doing? The world is getting crazy out there. And then the Strawhats are like, wait, what? What do you mean the world is getting crazy? We've been here for 1 day. And they're like, no, guys, it's been like a week. You guys have been MIA for a while. I think that could happen. I think it'd be really cool. Of course, it would be really sad because that means we'd be missing out on a lot of key events, but maybe Oda will go back and show us via flashbacks. I don't know. And then, of course, if there is time dilation here, we do have to question how it works because there's many variations of time dilation, right? Does it affect the body? If we train in Elbaph, does it work at a 3 times rate to make up for lost time or no? Does it not make up for that, and we're simply losing time by staying here? There's so many questions with it. And of course, it's just a theory right now. It's not confirmed, but it does seem like Oda is reinforcing the theories. I view theories like percentages or stocks even. The theory before this chapter was at like a 30-40%. After this chapter, I think it's at like a 75%. Right? That is where I'm personally. I'm believing it more than not. But that's just me. So I have yapped long enough. How long have I been going? Over an hour. Wow. Look at that, dude. Over an hour? Is this possibly the longest review video on this channel? Maybe. I think so, man. I think so. But with that being said, though, guys, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Sitting here, listening to me yap for an hour about a One Piece chapter, that is a feat. If we had a power skill, you guys, my God, dude, I'd be kind of nuts. That sounds so stupid. But again, I appreciate y'all for being here. I will, in the next couple of days, be going through the comment section and reading what you guys have to say in response to my theories, to this chapter and all that good stuff. So if you want your comment read, make sure to comment it down below and I will possibly get to it. I sort from top to bottom and I kind of just go on for like 30 minutes or so. So if I read you, bingo. If not, I apologize, right? There's only so many I can read. But of course, you'll never know if I read it or not unless you comment. So make sure to drop those down below and I will catch you guys in the next video. Shameless plugs, I just always have to do this for myself. I always throw this at the end of the video, so hopefully, it's not too bad. But I do have a gaming channel over at Syvduck here on YouTube where I post gaming clips, mainly horror games, sometimes reactions as well to just random topics. Also, I stream every other night, late at night, over at Syvduck on Twitch. And I have an anime reaction channel called Somnus Reacts, where I react to One Piece, Black Butler, soon Dandadan and Sakamoto Days, and anything else that catches my fancy. So make sure to check that out too. And with that being said, I'll catch you guys later. Thanks for watching again. Signing out.